Let's talk about rights. So in a previous video, I mentioned this concept of positive rights versus negative rights, and I'd like to expand on that a little bit now. The idea of a right is it's an obligation on everyone else. And so if you have a negative right, that's a negative obligation on other people. I have a right to life. That means that everyone else is obligated to not kill me. I have a right to, let's see here, what are other good negative rights? Property is a negative right. My right to property is the right to withhold, which means that my right to have my acreage is an obligation on everyone else not to trespass, not to try to steal stuff, to not do certain things. So those are negative rights. Positive rights, by contrast, are rights that produce a positive obligation on someone else, meaning that they have to do a particular thing because you have a right. It's really easy to take the position that positive rights are more dangerous than negative rights, and this is the position that I take. I think that positive rights are more problematic because if I have a positive right to education, then that means that everyone else has an obligation, or at least some people have an obligation. At least someone has an obligation to provide me with an education. If I have a negative right to an education, that means that no one can stop me from getting an education. Those are different. If someone else has a positive right to education, can they demand that I pay for it? And that is the separate question. The negative right is pretty easy to defend. It's like, yeah, don't bother me when I'm trying to get my education. I'm not allowed to bother them when they're getting their education. Education is a really easy to defend negative right. Yeah, don't interfere. But if it's a positive right, then suddenly we have the awkward question of who's footing the bill. Now, some positive rights are diffuse. It's like the right to defense, like on a national level. I have a right to live in a safe country, and that means that we need police officers and military personnel to do the defending. And I also have obligations as a member of the society. Maybe I get drafted, maybe I get included in that defending force. So that obligation is spread out really, really wide, and then I might have to share a small portion of that burden. Taxation is generally how these super diffuse rights get spread around. I want to mention specifically two positive rights that I think are kind of unavoidable. One of them is the rights of children. Children are not able to take care of themselves, particularly if you're looking at infants. So we enter this world, all of us, as children who have literally no means of taking care of ourselves. We are not physically or emotionally or mentally capable of handling our own affairs. And so that creates positive obligations on other human beings, our parents, at the very least, to take care of us. We have a positive right to that support, and it is a wrong, it is a moral affront if we do not receive it. So the rights of children fit in that class. You could add in the rights of people who are sufficiently like children, such as those who are mentally handicapped. But that's at least one example where pretty unambiguously there's a positive right. Another example of a positive right is the right to the courts. So if I get hurt, I have a right to sue people, and that right creates obligations on other people, which is fascinating. This is another example, at least in the United States, of a recognized constitutional positive right. I have a right if I get involved in a court case. For example, let's say I'm a defendant. Let's say somebody accuses me of murder. In that case, I have a right to an attorney. That positive right to an attorney means that it is wrong for my court system to withhold an attorney from me, which means that the court can force somebody to be my attorney, a public defender, and also that we as a society have a positive obligation to pay for that attorney. So that's an example. Another example is if I sue somebody. Let's say I sue somebody who trespassed on my land and installed a pit, a bear trap on my porch, and then I stepped in the bear trap and they're clearly liable and negligent and all these horrible things. Well, I sue them. When I sue them, I submit a document to the court that says I am initiating this lawsuit. I submit that same document to them, and then they have a legal obligation to show up. If they don't show up, they lose the case. And if they lose the case, they have an additional legal obligation to pay what I asked for. And so it's in all their best interest to show up. This is another example of positive rights. I have the right to haul them in. And then once the case is actually going, my attorney and their attorney will both have rights, positive rights, obligations on the other party to provide them with information. I can't withhold documents from the other side. They have a right to go through my files and say, records say that you have been collecting bear traps and that it was actually you leaving it out, or something like that. So those are examples of positive rights. Positive rights create positive obligations that other people have to do a particular thing. Negative rights create an obligation for people to not do something. And so that's really, really interesting. Too many rights means too many obligations. And so I think as a society, we need to be really selective about which rights we really want to articulate as rights, because every right brings with it attendant obligations. And you don't want those to multiply beyond a point, or else it starts eroding the rights you've already got. One example of an area where the common law has not recognized a positive right, and I think properly so, is there is no obligation to be a good Samaritan. What do I mean by that? Let's say you see somebody drowning, and you see somebody drowning and you can jump in to save them. Will you be prosecuted if you don't? If you withhold saving that person? No, because the common law does not respect or acknowledge a positive obligation to be a good Samaritan. Will you be praised if you save them? Yes, that is a wonderful thing. But the law will not hold you liable for not doing that. Now, it might sound wrong for there not to be an obligation to do that, and I think there is a moral obligation, but a legal obligation is different. In this case, let's say that there's security camera footage that says you were in the area when somebody was drowning, and so now you're being prosecuted for not saving them. And let's say you didn't know that they were drowning, you didn't have any reason to do that. Oh, the water was icy cold, and if you jumped in, and you can't swim, so what could you have done? And there wasn't any rope or anything to throw to them. So, I mean, there could be reasons. There could be reasons why you didn't do it. Lack of knowledge, maybe you weren't in the area, maybe the security camera footage was off by a few minutes, or the reports of when the person drowned were off by a few minutes. So suddenly proving it becomes really hard, and that obligation becomes sticky. It's yet another thing that you can be prosecuted for, which is what all obligations are. They are things that you are legally obligated to, which means that someone can point a gun at you and say, by order of the court, this is what you need to do. Some of those we need, some of them are good. Defense of children, that's a good one for their support. Another is the rights that we have to haul other people into court to answer for their misdeeds or things that they have or haven't done. I'm fascinated with this topic because it is at the core of so many political discussions, and many things that we feel like we should get. If you raise that to the level of a right, you're creating an obligation on someone else. And I want to see a balancing act there where is the benefit brought about by recognizing that right better than the difficulties raised by the obligation. So positive rights, negative rights, at least two examples of positive rights, and that's the end of this video. I'd be fascinated to hear what you think about positive rights and negative rights. If you want to add things to my list or leave a point about this general topic, please leave that below, and we'll see you next time.